When you consider how much hard work, pain, and physical turmoil are to be found in the lives of MMA fighters, it's only natural that things can get emotional from time to time, whether it's happiness, sadness, or pure raw fury. These are MMA's most emotional moments. Matt Hughes makes the walk. Matt Hughes is indeed a divisive figure within MMA circles, but in 2015, he had the support of the entire MMA community behind him when tragedy struck. In what was a truly bizarre accident, a train struck the side of his truck as he drove through a railway crossing. And while he sustained very little in the way of broken bones for the most part, brain and spinal issues plagued him in the years that followed. So when the UFC opted to make him the guest of honor during a St. Louis event 3 years later, he received a fighter-style walkout, complete with regular UFC graphics and everything. After his years of service atop the welterweight division during one of its most well-loved eras, to see the promotion pay tribute to Hughes like that was truly a special moment. A face-off for the ages. In the heat of battle, raw emotion can sometimes display itself in the most unlikely of ways, and after the fourth round of one of MMA's all-time greatest bouts, the bloody and battered duo that were Robbie Lawler and Rory MacDonald decided to eat their own valuable recovery time to engage in a stare-down for the ages. MMA images don't come much more iconic than this, as this pair of warriors refused to break eye contact until the last possible moment. It was almost as if they were making an unspoken agreement there and then to bring the thunder in the fifth and final round. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened shortly after. In fact, it took Lawler crushing the nose of MacDonald to bring the bout to its close. Widely regarded as one of the 4 or 5 best fights in MMA history, these two men wrote themselves into the history books with this inhuman display of fighting spirit and grit. Cormier bears all. It might have seemed like meme-worthy material back then, but as time went on, Daniel Cormier's position as the villain to Jon Jones's hero was slowly replaced by a widespread respect for him and his abilities. And, in reality, Joe Rogan should never have interviewed the clearly concussed DC just seconds after he had sustained perhaps the single most disappointing loss of his career. However, with an eye on bringing the audience a complete show, Joe opted to bring DC to the mic. The resulting interview was a pretty difficult watch if we're being honest. Cormier, though he did his best to keep it together, sobbed his way through the interview, openly questioning the legitimacy of his rivalry with Jon Jones given that the champ had gone 2-0 against him. Of course, Jones's failed drug test shortly after would see the bout declared as a no contest, with Cormier getting his belt back. But all in all, even if it left DC as a more sympathetic figure in the eyes of the fans, it shouldn't really have ever gotten to that point. A mountain to climb. These days, Conor McGregor is more known for emotional displays of pure rage than anything else. But during his legendary climb into featherweight title contention, his interim title showdown with Chad Mendes showcased another side to him entirely. After his original opponent, Jose Aldo, pulled out on just 2 weeks' notice, and a tear to his own ACL saw him faced with the very real possibility of his own withdrawal, after he managed to TKO Mendes in the second round, the emotion poured out of Conor in a way that we haven't seen since. Covered in his own blood after a hard-fought showdown, McGregor was reduced to tears in his post-fight interview as he hoisted his interim belt onto his shoulder. It was a star-making moment in every sense of the word, and a cherry on top for one of the greatest events in UFC history. Glover Teixeira finally breaks through. 2021 was the year that saw the MMA community come together, if only for one moment, in unanimous appreciation for Glover Teixeira. Once seen by many as a footnote in the career of the great Jon Jones after the 205-pound legend thoroughly dominated him back in 2014, the way that this Brazilian veteran fought through this adversity was truly stunning to watch in real time. And last year, after 5 straight victories that saw him score 4 finishes, the exact same run of form that led to his first crack at UFC gold 7 years prior, Teixeira was ready for a second attempt. This time, at 42 years old, he was the betting underdog to the in-form Jan Blachowicz, a man who had just doubled down his reputation as the division's #1 with an upset victory over the superstar Israel Adesanya. However, fate was on Glover's side, and the resulting bout was a surprisingly one-sided affair, before Teixeira managed to force the tap in the second round. Fans all across the globe were stunned, as Teixeira became the oldest first-time champion the promotion had ever known, and for many of us, an unlikely hero within this modern era. Thug Rose. It's hard not to love Rose Namajunas. As the only fighter in women's MMA history to recapture a UFC title that she had once lost, her habit of upsetting the odds time and time again have led many to regard her as both the present and the future of the 115-pound division, arguably the best women's weight class. And though we could have easily picked a recent victory over Weili Zhang for this list, we can't look past the moment that originally turned Rose into a star, her shocking first-round KO of the heavily favored Joanna Jędrzejczyk at UFC 217. Joanna had it all: the skills, the resume, the look, the confidence, and yet, when it came time to fight, the BJJ fighter that was Thug Rose managed to knock her down twice in the opening round, leading to both a referee stoppage and a tap from the champ. Rose, who was really struggling to keep it together during her coronation, repeatedly said, "I'm the champ," almost as a chant to convince herself of what had just happened. All things considered, it was a truly moving moment from this fan favorite. TJ can't help himself. Emotional moments inside the cage don't always have to be happy or kind in their makeup, and for this legendary celebration from the two-time bantamweight champion TJ Dillashaw, months of very public drama between him and his gym mate turned rival Cody Garbrandt eventually led to one hell of a release of emotion after he scored the win. The fight itself was a thriller that saw both men have their moments, but when TJ eventually dropped Cody and followed up with a barrage of strikes to close the show, he immediately got straight in his former friend's face and roared like a madman. Some might call it overkill, but under the circumstances, given what he had endured, it was a pretty organic response. Aldo falls apart. Whoever signed off on the decision to do a live broadcast of Jose Aldo's dressing room following his embarrassing defeat to Conor McGregor at UFC 194 should be ashamed of themselves. You all know the story behind the 13-second KO that changed the game forever, but what some of you might not know is that a pretty lengthy clip of Aldo's immediate reaction was made public in the days that followed. A clip that showed the legendary former champion totally distraught as he sits on the ground being consoled by his teammates. Some moments should remain private, and when you consider just how much Jose had done for the sport up until that point, the fact that we ever saw this moment is truly shocking, all things considered. Thankfully, Aldo, being the legend that he is, managed to rediscover his form in the face of what seemed to be an unavoidable decline, reinventing himself as a top bantamweight contender years later. The downfall of Anderson Silva. It was the moment that shook the world of MMA to its very core. Anderson Silva might have been caught playing around by Chris Weidman in their first middleweight title matchup, but those who knew what the Spider was capable of were convinced that their rematch would be a far more competitive affair. However, even the wildest of predictions could not have forecast how this fight actually played out. Upon firing off a seemingly routine leg kick on his opponent, Silva's leg snapped in two, leading to one of the most shocking fight conclusions you are ever likely to see. Not only was this legendary former champion unable to recapture his title, but at the time, this injury seemed to suggest that he would never fight again, or at the very least, that he would never be the same fighter he once was. And in many ways, he wasn't. A truly heartbreaking end to Anderson Silva's time as an elite competitor within the division he ruled for so many wonderful years. The bad guys exit. Chael Sonnen might be undisputed and undefeated, having never once lost a round, but even the American gangster lets his fans see behind the mask during the emotional retirement press conference that followed his rough TKO defeat at the hands of Lyoto Machida. After having come just about as close as possible to realizing his dream of becoming UFC champion, a dream he shared with his late father, when a reporter asked him what he would tell his dad if he had the chance, Chael's tearful response left the room totally moved with emotion. And when you consider how he was a matter of seconds away from beating Anderson Silva, it's hard to shake the feeling that Sonnen came away from his own MMA career with more what-ifs than most.